Hello there Hollows and welcome to another video. In this video I'm going to be talking about how I personally think there could still potentially be room for the Dark Souls franchise to continue going on and moving forward, whilst potentially the Elden Ring franchise moves on doing its own separate thing. Now, this is probably going to be a bit controversial potentially. I know Elden Ring is a fantastic game. I love Elden Ring in its own way for all the things that it does, and of course Elden Ring is being branded as essentially the future of the Dark Souls franchise. It's the future of that franchise now. That's what Dark Souls has evolved to, like how Kingsfield sort of evolved to become Demon Souls, which evolved to become Dark Souls. Now it's evolved to become Elden Ring. It's sort of the future of FromSoftware's fantasy RPGs. I get that. However, I personally feel like there could still be room for Dark Souls to be its own separate thing. I would not be against the idea of the B team continuing on with the Dark Souls franchise whilst Miyazaki spearheads Elden Ring moving forward. Now, before you all dislike the video and go off in the comments down below, hear me out, okay? In my personal opinion, to begin with, the open world sort of dilutes everything, and the caves and the dungeons are very repetitive, and they mean there's a lot of bosses being reused, which sort of means that bosses don't have that same awesome feeling when you encounter them. There are way too many bosses in Elden Ring. There's just so many. It's a bit much, really, and a lot of the time they are just reskins of a previous boss with a couple of different moves and things here and there to tweak it, or sometimes it is literally just a boss being reused, which takes away from that boss. Think about like how awesome it is when you're playing Dark Souls 3 and you get to Pontiff Sullivan. That's an awesome fight. It's amazing. Or the Nameless King. But then imagine if you play Dark Souls 3 and there was 3 Pontiff Sullivans, and they all have the exact same moveset. It's not the same, doesn't have the same impact when you get to that Pontiff Sullivan fight, and you don't feel as accomplished when you defeat it because there's going to be another 2 you got to fight later. To me, I think repeating bosses, and the same goes for repeating the caves and the dungeons, those areas get really samey really quickly. They do try and spice things up a little bit by changing them here and there, but they do get very repetitive and quite boring in my opinion. Additionally, I personally think that open world means there's a lot of busy work you need to do before you actually start a run playing the game. So if you're doing a solo level 1 run, for example, you know when you start, the second you get to Limgrave, there's going to be a checklist of things that you need to get and things you need to do before you actually can start your solo level 1 run properly, getting through the bosses. I think, to me, this just adds a whole lot of boring stuff you got to do at the start of the game, just running around on your horse from place to place to place, ticking things off of a checklist before you actually get to the main meat and potatoes of the game. And like doing a solo level 1 run on Dark Souls 1 is very different. Yes, there might be a couple of things you got to pick up on your run through the game, but it's not as tedious, in my personal opinion, going through all of that, because there isn't just a million things, a kind of checklist you got to do. Also, this is just a small thing, but I don't like how the hub area is so separated in Dark Souls games now. I would really like to see it go back to having a hub area that's actually connected to the main world. Like, Bloodborne started this tradition of the hub area for some reason always being separate from everything else. And I don't know why they keep doing that, because everyone's favourite hub areas, as far as I'm concerned anyway, is Firelink Shrine and Majula. Everyone generally agrees Majula is a good hub area for all of Dark Souls 2's floors. But then having the Hunter's Dream, and then the Firelink Shrine Dark Souls 3, and then, I mean, to be fair, Sekiro actually had an area you go back to which was connected to the main world. Why didn't Elden Ring do that? I mean, you do actually find a version of that area later in Elden Ring, but why isn't it just connected to the main world anyway? It's just a pet peeve that I have, really. But anyway, the B team, now for those of you who aren't aware entirely, the B team, like everyone calls them the B team, but Dark Souls 2 went through 2 stages of development, right? You had the first half of development, which was spearheaded by one guy. Then it switched to be a second guy. I can't remember their names off the top of my head, I'm sorry. The second guy that took over during the second half of Dark Souls 2 development, he is the person that I think you would want to get leading a B team if they were ever going to have another game that's similar to, you know, Dark Souls, spearheaded by someone else. Because the second person who took over during the second half of Dark Souls 2 development, he also ran the 3 DLCs. The level design and the world design in those DLCs is very good. I honestly think it was crafted very well. It had that same kind of flavour that we all like in Dark Souls, with the shortcuts going back on each other and more personal encounters where it felt like things were placed in certain ways to sort of create a certain experience as you progress through those DLCs. I would love to see a game spearheaded by him as the B team, like a Dark Souls 4 potentially. I don't know, maybe Bandai Namco might want a Dark Souls 4 because there still could be room for that. I would also love if they actually just remade all the games. Go from Dark Souls 1, 2 and 3. Remake all those games, along with Bloodborne as well. I think that could be a really good way of pleasing the old fans while still keeping Miyazaki making these newer games in the future. Because I think that's a good idea that they could do. It's similar to what Resident Evil are doing, where they have one new game, one remake, one new game, one remake. Maybe remake Dark Souls 1, then have another Elden Ring game, then remake Dark Souls 2, so on and so forth. But obviously, FromSoftware are making Armored Core 6 now, and then maybe they'll do a sequel to Elden Ring or something eventually. I also think the crafting systems are something that I didn't really like at all in Elden Ring. It was pointless. There were needless additions which just slowed down finding certain key items. You had to find certain things to craft things, and I just thought it's a very trendy kind of thing to have crafting systems in open world games nowadays, and it just sort of felt like it don't really need that in Elden Ring. We don't really need that system. It just felt pointless to me personally. Now also, this is a big thing for me, is Elden Ring doesn't really have, in my opinion, it doesn't feel like the enemies are as carefully placed, and the position of enemies in the environment doesn't feel like they are as careful. Again, a lot of the time in Dark Souls, it felt like enemies were placed in certain ways which told a greater story about the places and the locations you're in. When enemies are sort of patrolling in the open world in Elden Ring, it doesn't feel like they're sort of carefully put there with a purpose. Sometimes you'll just find an enemy just in a random place. Now, I know a lot of time, yes, sometimes they do actually have story significance as to why certain places are in, or certain people are in certain places, but a lot of the time it does feel like it doesn't have that same careful, the attention to detail that some of the earlier Dark Souls games did with things like that. For me personally, the Dark Souls level sections of Elden Ring are what I really want more of. Those areas, like when you get to Margard, from that area between Margard and Godric, that whole level section there, those levels, the main level sections, when you can't really warp out of certain areas, that's what I want more of. I want more of those levels, as opposed to the big open world, which to me, that's not what I play Elden Ring for. I don't play it for those kind of sections. Or you could say it's not what I play Dark Souls or FromSoftware games for. Those sections. Personally, that's not really... Like, if I was going to play an open world, I would play Skyrim. To me, Skyrim does that kind of open world exploration kind of stuff better. It could be controversial to say to Dark Souls fans, but I play Dark Souls and FromSoftware games for a certain kind of experience. I would not play those kind of games if I was looking for an open world experience. It seems like it clearly worked. Elden Ring did end up becoming more accessible. That's why it sold 17 million copies as opposed to Dark Souls 3's 6 or 7 million. So clearly it worked, and I am glad that the game has become more successful and got more fans. But there's just something about that original Dark Souls trilogy and Bloodborne and Demon Souls that I love, that Elden Ring doesn't quite satisfy that kind of side of me. That side of me in the same kind of way, and maybe some of you will understand what I'm talking about. For some reason, I feel like this video has been more rambling than normal for me, but hopefully you understand what I'm talking about, and maybe some of you relate to this kind of thing. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'd really be interested in hearing what you all think. I mean, to be honest, if we do end up getting a Bloodborne 2, which a lot of people have been really vocal about wanting, that would probably end up satisfying that side of me as well, because Bloodborne obviously is more that kind of thing. Sekiro didn't really satisfy that side of me. I think that's what it is, really, is I haven't really had that kind of Dark Souls experience for a while. I'm the kind of person who didn't enjoy Sekiro, and Elden Ring has that kind of stuff that I'm looking for, but it just feels like it's being held back for me with a few pet peeves and grievances that I have. But anyway, I'm going on now. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Maybe even share this video with anyone you think might enjoy it if it was good enough. Thank you again for watching. This is Soul Reborn signing out. Have a good one.